It all started with one man setting himself on fire, a one-man self-immolation, a fruit vendor in a small town in Tunisia. He wasn't trying to spark a revolution. He just wanted someone to hear him. Weeks later, a dictator who ruled for 23 years was gone. And sitting at the center of it all, watching, writing, warning, was Gordon Gray, the US ambassador, the man whose job was to stay calm when the world unraveled. And today we're not asking what happened. You're asking, what do you say when history explodes right in front of you? Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being with us. Let's start with that moment, Bouazizi's self-immolation. Did you know this was going to change Tunisia, or did it feel like another flashpoint in a difficult place?
Well, when Mohamed Bouazizi set himself on fire on December 17th, 2010 in Sidi Bouzid, at that point, we did not know, or we did not realize that it was going to unleash a momentous chain of events that led not just to the downfall of Ben Ali 4 weeks later, but also the Arab Spring uprisings that we saw throughout North Africa and the Middle East. I would say the moment we realized that the regime was taking it very, very seriously was when, at the end of December, President Ben Ali visited Mohamed Bouazizi in the burn unit. And the reason we knew that meant that the regime was taking it so seriously is that in authoritarian political situations, such as the one in Tunisia at the time, there was rulers did not visit subjects, and here the ruler was visiting the subject.
Mm, mm. And did you know this was going to change Tunisia?
Not at the time the immolation happened, and not even at the time that that I referred to when Ben Ali visited Bouazizi in the burn unit. It was remember that a year and a half before there had been or sorry, yeah, a year and a half before, 2.5 years before, there had been demonstrations in Gafsa, a significant amount of labor unrest. So we knew that there was a high degree of dissatisfaction, but not what we did not know was the degree to which there would be such rapid mass mobilization.
It felt for you at that moment just another flashpoint in a difficult situation.
Yes, I would say flashpoint in a difficult situation is a good way to put it.
Mm, mm. But who was calling you, like, to check? Who was calling from Washington, D.C.? Who was calling from Tunisia? Did you receive any phone calls? Were people
What
afraid?
No, people weren't afraid. We were doing our job as far as keeping Washington informed and sharing our analysis with Washington.
Mm. And was there a phrase Washington kept repeating that didn't fit the reality on the grounds?
No, I wouldn't say so. We were fortunate in one respect, which was that the Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern at the time, Ambassador Jeff Feltman,
Mhm.
had served in Tunisia about 10 years before. He had served there as 1998 to 2000. So he had a good appreciation for Tunisia. He had still maintained contact with many of the people in civil society he had known when he was there.
Mm.
So we had good support and good understanding from Washington.
And how did you feel the uncertainty? Uh, People who were calling you from Washington, D.C., what was the main focus in their uncertainty? Or maybe the power of what wasn't being said over the phones?
No, um, I wouldn't overstate the amount of I wouldn't accept your premise that we were getting a whole bunch of calls from Washington on it. Any embassy that's doing its job, and I like to think we were doing our job, is understands Washington's information needs and tries to stay ahead of the curve by providing that information.
Then came the cables. The world saw what you'd been saying privately about Ben Ali's regime, the corruptions, the fear, which was also by many Tunisian journalists, whether they are overseas or in Tunisia, were saying. But how did it feel to have your private truth go global?
It was a betrayal of trust that never should have happened, and it's still not clear to me what the motivations, what the exact motivations of the person who leaked it or of Julian Assange who published it were. I think what's lost in the discussion is the human element, and I'm not just talking about Tunisia, I'm talking about worldwide, where there were many private citizens who trusted that their conversations with U.S. officials would remain confidential, so they were candid, and then some of them had to pay some considerable price for their candor.
And how do you remember how did Tunisians feel about this, positively or negatively, toward those cables?
Um, in the United States, some people like to draw a through line from the WikiLeaks cables to the to the beginning of the protests and things like that. I tend to discount that analysis. I think it's too American centric. The people of Tunisia did not need a leaked cable to tell them that the Ben Ali regime was corrupt or that the family was enriching itself at the expense of the Tunisian people.
You're known for not speaking a lot or giving public statements, but one statement stood out when I was preparing this episode is when you said, "We are diplomats, not propagandists." What did you mean by that? And if time went back, would you say something else, or would you repeat the same sentence?
I have to admit, I don't remember the context that I said that. You've got a better research abilities than I've got a memory, but I suspect what I was getting at was we were not trying to suggest to the Tunisian people their political outcomes. One phrase I tried to use frequently that I do recall was that we were interested in the process, not the outcome. And by that, we meant we wanted, following the revolution, we wanted the Tunisian people to be able to determine their future. But the emphasis there was the Tunisian people and the process, not what the exact outcome would be.
Uh, that takes me to ask you candidly and honestly, do you think some diplomats, some politicians today, people who work in policy making, are propagandists and not diplomats?
I'm sure there are. I think most career diplomats are in the former category of diplomats. There are people in the political sphere in the United States and elsewhere who are more propagandists, and it's just a feature of our
Mm.
current political situation.
Let's talk about after the fall. And what do you say when dictators are gone? Ben Ali fled. The country was writing a new chapter in real time. How do you communicate as a U.S. ambassador in that moment? And what shouldn't you say, you think?
What we sh- what I didn't think was right for us to do was pick winners and losers,
Mm.
and that's why, again, we emphasized our great interest in seeing an process that would serve the Tunisian people, but not any specific outcome. One of there were a few ways we communicated. One is one of the things I did in I think it was my first television interview after Ben Ali fell. It was a few days afterwards. It was with Al Jazeera, and I made sure that we did the interview outside
Mm.
because I wanted the viewers to see that life was going on normally. There may have been a political revolution, but the Tunisian people were carrying on as as viewers could see when the camera shot was shooting outside and saw the streets and the like. Um, so that was one way we tried to communicate. Another way we tried to communicate was by our support for the transition, amplifying what President Obama had said. And specifically, Ben Ali fell January 14th, 2011. That year, the State of the Union address had been scheduled for just 11 days later, January 25th. And President Obama, in that speech, said that the events in Tunisia showed that the will of the people was stronger than the writ of the dictator, and the United States of America stands with the democratic aspirations of Tunisia and people throughout the world. That was a very powerful statement that resonated with Tunisians. So we made sure to amplify that as much as we could.
We are not here to impose, we are here to listen and support the choices made by Tunisians themselves. What about this philosophy of listening diplomacy?
Listening is an essential part of diplomacy. If you're just um, transmitting and you're not listening, then you don't have a good understanding of what is going on in a country.
And how does this translate? I mean, we talk a lot about listening to each other, listening, and the most important part of communication, and speaking and having relationships, whether in bedrooms or boardrooms. But how does that translate? How do diplomats, how do policy makers listen or should listen? Is there an advice?
I think what's important is to maintain contact with a wide variety of people so that you get a wide range of perspectives.
Mm.
That was difficult to do before the revolution, to be honest, but it was just because the impositions placed on the Tunisian people by the Ben Ali regime. But it was very easy to do after the revolution, and I was fortunate to be able to travel throughout the country very easily.
Mhm. And how did you communicate with civil society versus the interim government?
Let me give you two examples from before the revolution, if I may. One was in October 2009. It was about 6 weeks after I got there, when Ben Ali was once again reelected, and reelected in quotation marks. Our recommendation to Washington, which was readily accepted, was that President Obama not send the routine congratulatory message that the White House usually sends
Mm.
following an election. Um, uh, that advice was heeded, and that's with a D, not heated, but he did. And there was no congratulatory message forthcoming. The reason we made that recommendation is we wanted to signal to Tunisian civil society that that we did not believe it was a fair and free election.
Mm.
Second example was the LTDH, the Tunisian Human Rights League. Uh, and again, this is 2010, so before the revolution. It was holding an anniversary celebration. The embassies were warned not to send people to attend, warned by the regime. We sent our human rights officer. Now, there were so many plainclothes policemen circling the event, he was not able to get in. but we were the only embassy who sent someone to try to get into the celebration. And again, civil society noticed. So those are two key ways where we were able to signal to civil society that we shared some of their goals and that we stood with them.
Looking back now, over a decade later, what do you think the West used wrong language about the Arab Spring?
I think that the not just the words, but the actions that followed reflected that support.
Do you think the West used wrong language about the Arab Spring, which means was the framing too reactive or too cautious?
In Tunisia, um, as you can imagine, I think we pretty much got it right. I think there was less a less clear message in Egypt, particularly after the overthrow of Mohamed Morsi, President Morsi, when the United States said we don't have to make a determination whether it was a coup or not. I think that was muddled messaging as well. And I also think it's very difficult when you might be talking about one country, but the message is heard in other countries as well. So the Syrians who were rising up against Bashar understandably thought that the United States would play an active role in Syria the way it did in Egypt and in Libya, and then that turned out not to be the case.
What advice would you give to diplomats today navigating Sudan, Congo, Gaza, Tunisia's own backsliding?
Two pieces of it guidance that I tried to follow. One is it's really important to be in tune with Washington, understand what Washington's priorities are, what the policy is. That's one thing, and the second thing, as I said before, it's important to get a really wide variety of perspectives, so that you can give Washington the best possible informed analysis.
Looking back at your cables, speeches, and conversations during those chaotic weeks, what's one word or phrase you used that changed the tone or the outcome, you think?
First and foremost, it was a Tunisian revolution, and it was important that the United States and the West and friends of Tunisia bear that in mind. And I think that one phrase I remember saying it at the press conference we held right after the Constituent Assembly elections on October 23rd, 2011, when NADA won a plurality of the vote and therefore plurality of the seats in the Constituent Assembly. One of the journalists asked me if the United States would deal with the NADA, and pointed to our policy differences with Hamas. And I said, I remember saying, NADA is not Hamas. And that was as I expected, that was the quotation that was picked up and featured in many of the reporting. But I think it reassured Tunisians that the United States was going to respect the outcome of the elections.
And what's one phrase or expression you wish diplomats stop using today?
That's a tough, I can't, nothing comes to mind. That's a tough question.
One of your fellow diplomats, ambassadors to Turkey and Egypt, Mr. Francis Ricciardone, said red lines. That because it's
That's fair. Yeah, that's a fair one. It's very risky to talk about red lines if you're not going to adhere to them. But it's usually not. I mean, I think of that more in the presidential context than in the context of diplomats. But I would agree with him, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you.
Sometimes diplomacy means saying the safe thing, but sometimes it means saying what history will prove to be true. And in those moments, the right word isn't just a message, it's a marker of change.